At some point, you stopped trusting yourself. Not all at once. Not with one big decision that went wrong. It started smaller than that. With opinions you kept to yourself because someone dismissed them. With preferences you set aside because it was easier to go along. With feelings you talked yourself out of because someone told you you were overreacting. This is about how that happens and what you lose when the person you stop trusting is yourself. Most people who stop trusting themselves don't realize that's what happened. They think they became more flexible, more easygoing, more willing to see other perspectives. And maybe some of that is true. But there is a difference between genuinely considering other viewpoints and slowly learning to override your own. One is growth. The other is something quieter. Something that builds across years, across relationships, across 1,000 small moments, where your internal voice said one thing, and the world around you rewarded you for ignoring it. It probably started with something that seemed small. You had a feeling about something, a preference, an opinion, a sense that something wasn't quite right, and you expressed it, or tried to. And the response you got wasn't violent, wasn't cruel. It was something quieter, a dismissal, a slight eye roll, a change of subject, a you're overthinking it, or you're being too sensitive, or that's not how it works. And you filed that away, not consciously, but somewhere in you, a small note was made. This feeling was wrong. This opinion wasn't welcome. This version of me caused friction. So the next time a similar feeling arose, you hesitated. You second-guessed. You ran it through a kind of internal filter. Is this real? Am I overreacting? Should I say something? And sometimes you did. And sometimes the same thing happened again. So the filter got stronger, and the hesitation got longer. And eventually, without deciding to, you started defaulting to other people's versions of reality instead of your own. When you stop trusting your own voice, something moves in to fill the space. Usually it's the voices of the people who taught you not to trust yourself. The ones who said, "You're too sensitive." The ones who said, "You always make things complicated." The ones who responded to your feelings with explanations of why your feelings were wrong. And after hearing those voices long enough, you started to speak in them yourself. You became your own best critic. You second-guessed your instincts before anyone else could. You minimized your feelings before they could be minimized by someone else. You talked yourself out of things so efficiently that you often couldn't tell anymore where your actual thoughts ended and the filtered version began. And the cruelest part, this started to feel like wisdom, like self-awareness, like being the kind of person who doesn't overreact, who doesn't make a fuss, who is reasonable. But there is a difference between being reasonable and having learned that your inner experience is not to be trusted. When you stop trusting yourself, the costs are not always obvious. They show up slowly, in the way you can no longer tell what you actually want for dinner because you have spent so long deferring to what everyone else wants. In the way you ask for reassurance about decisions that should feel simple. In the way you feel a sense of unease about something and immediately dismiss it before letting yourself investigate. In the way you are often the last person you consult when something important needs to be decided. And perhaps most painfully, in the way you can feel something very clearly, a discomfort, a knowing, a quiet voice saying this isn't right, and talk yourself out of it before anyone has to. Because you learned somewhere along the way that your feelings were unreliable narrators, that your instincts were prone to exaggeration, that the version of reality that other people offered was probably more accurate than the one you felt from the inside. There is often a moment when you become aware of what has happened. It doesn't always come as a revelation. Sometimes it comes as a question. Why can't I make simple decisions anymore? Why do I always feel like I need someone to tell me if what I'm feeling is valid? Why do I trust strangers' opinions more than my own? And sometimes it comes as a memory, a specific moment you can point to, when you knew something, felt something clearly, and ignored it. Not because you were naive, but because the cost of trusting yourself in that moment felt higher than the cost of going along. And you were right in that moment. Trusting yourself would have caused friction, would have made things harder, would have required you to hold your ground in an environment that did not make holding your ground feel safe. So you chose the easier path again and again, until the easier path became the only path you knew. I want to say something clearly. Maybe your instincts were never the problem. Maybe your feelings were never too much. Maybe that quiet internal knowing that kept trying to tell you something was not overreacting. It was information. Accurate, personal, important information about your own experience. And it was information you were taught to distrust. Not because it was wrong, but because trusting it would have changed things, would have required other people to account for your reality, would have made you less easy to manage, less agreeable, less convenient. And so the message you received, again and again, in small ways and large ones, was your version of reality is less reliable than ours. And after hearing that long enough, you believed it. If you have spent years not trusting yourself, I want you to consider something. The fact that you question yourself so deeply, that you examine your feelings so carefully, that you wonder so often whether you are perceiving things correctly, that is not evidence that your perceptions are unreliable. It is evidence that you learn to survive in an environment where your perceptions were regularly questioned. And there is a difference between perceptions that need examining and a habit of dismissing yourself before anyone else has the chance to. Your inner voice did not become unreliable. It became quiet, because quiet felt safer than being told, again, that it was wrong. But it is still there, underneath the second guessing, underneath the filters and the hesitation and the deference. It is still there. And maybe, slowly, in small moments, it is worth beginning to listen again. Not because it will always be right, but because it is yours, and it has been waiting for a long time to be heard.